question was casual, almost an afterthought during a bright afternoon in Manhattan. Curtis Jackson stood at an event celebrating a new business partnership, flanked by smiling staff and the infrastructure of hospitality. A reporter asked him about the lawsuit. Jackson's response lasted perhaps 10 seconds. He wasn't named in it, he said. Then, to be honest, I think it's postural. This moment, arriving on August 19, 2026, at Planet Hollywood in Times Square, contained everything necessary to understand the current state of a conflict that has consumed 2 decades of American hip-hop. The lawsuit itself had only become public 8 days earlier. The legal filing was dated August 11th. Diddy's team had moved to countersuit, but not against Netflix. Instead, the accusation pointed at music producer Rodney, Lil Rod Jones, the man who had sued Diddy in February 2024, alleging sexual assault and harassment in a $30 million civil complaint. Diddy, quote, "'s counter-allegation was precise. Jones had stolen private video footage intended for Combs' own documentary project and sold it to Netflix. That footage, recorded in a hotel room in Manhattan in the days before Combs asked Edge, is that oblique apt arbors mark entin tai fortant cast Dietchen in September 2024 formed the backbone of the 4-part series titled Sean Combs, The Reckoning, the documentary that Jackson had executive produced and that Netflix had distributed beginning December 2nd, 2025. For someone intimately familiar with legal strategies and media narrative, Jackson's assessment was economical. Postural. The word suggested not absence of threat, but performative threat. A gesture. Something for the legal record and the public posture, but not necessarily an indication of genuine strategic intent. Jackson's confidence in that assessment rested on a particular kind of knowledge. He understood what had already happened and what remained constrained. The Reckoning had premiered 8 months earlier. It had survived Diddy's December 2025 cease and desist letter. It had survived the threats of legal action. It had accumulated viewing numbers that qualified it as one of Netflix's most watched documentary series of the year. It had generated 3 Emmy nominations, including directing honors for Alexandria Stapleton and recognition in the most prestigious nonfiction categories. The legal infrastructure Diddy had threatened to deploy had not materialized against the streaming platform or Jackson himself. Now, with the countersuit against Jones filed in August, Jackson was in a position to evaluate not whether Diddy could harm him, but whether Diddy would attempt to do so, and what the motivation behind such an attempt would actually be. The assessment was immediate, postural, defensive theater. A man in federal custody at Fort Dix in New Jersey, serving a 50-month sentence, fighting dozens of civil lawsuits, with an appeal on his criminal conviction pending. Such a man could engage legal machinery, but the leverage was structural rather than actual. Jackson arrived at Planet Hollywood on August 19th to celebrate a different kind of success. The restaurant chain, reopened in 2025 at a new Manhattan location, had announced a partnership with Jackson in March 2026. The deal created PH Live, an entertainment venue within the restaurant space. The arrangement positioned Jackson at the nexus of hospitality, celebrity, and branded experience, a trajectory he had been pursuing for years alongside film production, beverage investments, and technology ventures. The menu collaboration was called 50 Cent Faves. It reflected Jackson's personal preferences. A 12-ounce New York strip steak with mashed potatoes and mac and cheese, a double smash burger with potatoes and chicken tenders, sweet chili fried shrimp, power box, priced at $85, combined multiple items as an homage to the Starz television franchise that Jackson had developed and produced. The curation was simple, items Jackson actually enjoyed, presented at a restaurant that would draw tourists and entertainment industry figures. The question about Diddy's lawsuit arrived in this context. Jackson was talking about a business development, a restaurant initiative, a menu. The lawsuit existed in the legal sphere. The business venture existed in the hospitality and entertainment sphere. Jackson, characteristically, occupied all three simultaneously. He could address the legal question directly without allowing it to define or constrain the announcement about the restaurant. "Well, I wasn't named in the lawsuit," he said, the precision of the statement carrying weight. The countersuit targeted Jones specifically. Jones had allegedly stolen the footage. Jones' actions, if proven, would constitute the theft and unauthorized transfer that Diddy's legal team was attempting to establish. Jackson's non-inclusion in the legal pleading told a story in itself. Diddy's attorneys had determined that the strongest available legal position was not attacking Jackson or Netflix directly, but rather pursuing the producer from whom the footage allegedly originated. The strategic calculation embedded in that legal choice was clear. A direct suit against Netflix would require proving damages from a streaming platform with substantial resources, legal sophistication, and insurance coverage. Lesson: Lee, Dashin, and insurance coverage. A direct suit against Jackson would require proving his involvement in theft or knowing receipt of stolen property, allegations that his attorneys could contest by pointing to Netflix's stated legal basis for the footage acquisition, but a suit against Jones, targeting the alleged source of the material, offered a different kind of leverage. Jones was an individual alleging abuse by Diddy. He had initiated the original lawsuit. He had motivation, access, and a history of friction with Diddy. Yet even this narrower legal pathway carried complications. Jones stood by his original allegations. His Rolling Stone interview from August 2024 contained his characterization of Diddy as a monster who would do whatever was necessary to get what he wanted, who didn't accept refusal. Jones had decided to participate in the documentary process that led to the reckoning. He had allowed his story to be told through that medium. For Jackson, the assessment that the countersuit was postural reflected practical understanding of leverage and trajectory. 8 days after the filing became public, sitting in a restaurant venue celebrating a new business partnership, Jackson could evaluate whether this legal action represented substantive threat or procedural positioning. His response suggested the latter. The lawsuit was theater, legal theater, the kind of motion a legal team files to establish a record, to maintain an appearance of action, to signal that their client hasn't accepted defeat. This was not unique to the Diddy situation. Jackson understood legal positioning from extensive experience. He had been sued multiple times. He had sued others. He had navigated defamation cases, assault allegations, intellectual property disputes. He understood the distance between a lawsuit filing and an actual trial, between legal threat and legal execution, between what existed on paper and what would actually occur in discovery and depositions and courtrooms. The documentary itself had moved beyond the moment of its release. The Emmy nominations had arrived. The series had found its audience. Cultural conversation had shifted from whether the documentary would be suppressed to what it contained, what it revealed, what it meant about the entertainment industry's tolerance for behavior that had eventually resulted in criminal conviction and imprisonment. The question of Diddy's lawsuit against Netflix had been answered by Netflix's continued distribution of the series. The question of whether Jackson would face legal consequences for his involvement had been answered by the absence of legal action naming him. What remained was the terrain of reputation and perception. Diddy's team had attempted to frame the documentary as a shameful hit piece, motivated by corporate revenge and personal vendetta. The accusations had substance to them in the sense that they were factually identifiable. Netflix's Ted Sarandos had proposed a documentary to Combs in 2023. Combs had rejected it when Sarandos insisted on creative control. Jackson had been Combs' longtime rival, with a documented 2-decade history of antagonism. The documentary had included never-before-seen footage of Combs that he clearly preferred not to be public. But substance in one register did not necessarily translate to substance in another. The documentary had been seen by millions of viewers. Those viewers had access to the content. They could evaluate whether it constituted a hit piece or a legitimate documentary examination of allegations and evidence. Jackson, in interviews, had not pretended to be neutral or disconnected from his subject. He had acknowledged his personal history with Combs. He had accepted descriptors like petty without defensiveness. "I accept that," he had said during prior interviews. "I'll take that. I'll wear that." This directness, the refusal to claim neutrality or pretend that the documentary existed, separate from Jackson's personal motivations, actually positioned him in stronger rhetorical terrain than feigned objectivity would have. He could acknowledge the personal dimension without pretending it invalidated the documentary's substance. The series had Emmy nominations, not because of Jackson's involvement, but because of its content, its direction by Stapleton, its interviews, its footage, its editorial decisions. Those elements existed independent of whether Jackson had been motivated by animus or ambition, or some combination of both. The countersuit against Jones represented a different kind of positioning. It was not an attempt to vindicate Diddy's reputation. Diddy's reputation had been adjudicated through his criminal trial. He had been convicted. He was imprisoned. He had delivered public statements from his sentencing in October 2025, apologizing for actions he described as disgusting, shameful, and sick. The countersuit was not aimed at restoring public image. It was aimed at controlling a specific narrative, where the documentary footage originated, who had authority over it, whether it had been stolen or legally obtained. If the countersuit against Jones succeeded in establishing that the footage was stolen, it created a different kind of liability cloud around the documentary. Netflix's legal position that the footage was legally obtained would be contested. The value of the documentary as evidence of Diddy's state of mind and legal strategy in those final days before his arrest might be challenged on grounds that it derived from improper acquisition. This was the legal strategy available to Diddy. It did not restore his freedom or reduce his sentence.